Hello, everyone, and welcome to the December version of the Law Enforcement Esri webinar series. My name is Chris Delaney. I'm the Law Enforcement Technical Lead. And today we'll be talking about some new tools that were recently released to help you automate the process of geocoding and publishing your data. So thanks for joining us, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Let's jump right into it. The first thing that I want to do today is talk a little bit about the webinar's agenda. First, we'll talk for a few minutes about some of the common challenges that analysts have with respect to the process that they go through on a daily basis for geocoding and layer creation as part of their standard analytical workflows. And then we'll talk about the new tools that we've recently released this past summer to help you automate that process if you don't have more advanced GIS staff on hand using the record import toolbox for ArcGIS. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you get started using that toolbox, where you'll find it, some considerations for your work. And from there, we'll take some questions if we have a little time at the end. So the first place that I want to start is with a quick poll question, and Ray, if you can help me with that. The reason we built this particular tool was to help law enforcement audiences and users with ArcGIS deal with the manual processes of data preparation that they go through on a daily basis. And by and large, the largest piece of that tends to be managing geocoding of that data. And as agencies have moved from just desktop GIS to web GIS, the process of publishing that data out as well. So if you want to respond to the poll, you can click on kind of how many hours in a day you're currently spending organizing your data to get it ready for analysis. The options are under an hour, you're getting it done relatively quickly, maybe 1 to 2 hours. Hopefully you're not spending more than 2 hours every day getting your data ready, but some of you may be. And then lastly, for the fortunate ones out there that already have their data automated, maybe nope, you don't have to worry about that because you already have your data already ready to go. Now let's give just one more minute and let's take a look at what our results are. Okay, so based on the results, 44% of you are spending 1 hour to 2 hours every day. That seems pretty common for many of the analysts that I talk to. I feel really bad for the 25% of you that are spending more than 2 hours a day getting your data ready to perform analysis. 22% of you are spending under an hour. Well, for any of you who are spending more than 0 hours every single day getting your data ready for analysis, hopefully today's webinar will provide you some new tools that can help streamline that process so you can get started with your work every single day. Ray, thanks for your help with the poll. So let's hop into the actual the challenge that poll really represents, that analysts struggle every single day when you have these manual processes for data preparation that take away from your own productivity efficiency as an analyst by having to spend so much time getting your data organized to do your work. And what we often see when working with law enforcement agencies is an agency has some database administrators, DBAs, who are responsible for going into those production systems, getting at the relational tables and flattening out that data. More often than not, what we see happen is those flattened versions of the data get dumped onto a network drive somewhere in the organization as spreadsheets. So that's generally things like crimes or arrests or calls for service, FIs, warrants, things of that nature. And analysts get these kind of nightly dumps, and they have a whole bunch of spreadsheets that then every day they have to go in and start to geocode and prepare for analysis. And those spreadsheets generally kind of come in two forms we see. Some of you may be getting kind of year-to-date or large historical dumps of data, or you might be getting them as just the the incidents from the night before, and it's your job to take that and then add it into an existing data set that you're managing. And so the process that we often see with those spreadsheets is they come in the overnight period. There's some sort of ETL process that the database administrator has set up, and they're running that in the middle of the night. And then you come into work in the morning and you have these updated spreadsheets. And for many analysts, that process generally looks something along these kinds of lines. You come in 7 or 8 a.m. and you start to manually geocode each of those spreadsheets. If you're doing year-to-date data dumps, it's taking you a really long time. So maybe by 10 a.m. you've gotten all of your data geocoded, cleaned up, ready to go. And now if you're using WebGIS, now you have to publish each of those layers or append each of those layers into your portal, whether that's ArcGIS Online or whether that's ArcGIS Enterprise. So you finally get that stuff done, and it's lunchtime. You barely have even started any kind of analytic work, and so by the time you're done with lunch, you're really digging into the meat of your analysis time at 1 o'clock, and at that point, the day is already half over. So the amount of time that you have to be productive is really compressed because this manual process of getting data out of enterprise databases and getting ready for work in GIS is just so time consuming. So we at Esri know that that's really a big problem for many analysts, and we've built the tools that you'll see today in order to make your lives a little bit easier. So the particular solution that we'll be discussing today is called the Record Import Toolbox. And we'll be walking through today how you configure the tools in that toolbox to automate these processes to save you a bunch of time. This particular toolbox is really meant for analysts in the following situations. Those of you who are getting those flat file extracts from an RMS or a CAD system every night. If you're managing your own data, where you have spreadsheets that you're manually updating every single day. Maybe you're capturing MO data or something along those lines, and you need to be able to geocode that every single day and publish that up. And it's also for folks who are going to have the right to run Windows tasks on their local computer. If you don't have that already, that's a conversation that you can have with your network security folks in your IT department. It's not that hard to get those permissions squared away so that you've got the ability to run automation when you aren't currently at your desk in the overnight hours when you're not logged onto your computer. In order to use these tools at a high level, you really need a couple of things. First, you're going to need spreadsheet data, so that data that you want to automate on a daily basis. You are going to need an address locator, and these tools basically give you two ways to use address locators. You can either use your own local address locator, or you could, if you wanted to you consume credits while doing it, you could consume the ArcGIS World geocoding service using these tools. That does cost credits to consume, so you have to keep that into account as you're trying to make determinations on what's the best fit for your particular set of needs. It is important that you're going to need to have ArcGIS Pro 2.0 or greater to utilize these tools. So you do need ArcGIS Pro to take advantage of these tools. And optional, but desired, is you do have access to ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. You can use these tools to publish your data to a local geodatabase feature class instead of publishing them up to a hosted feature service. That is an option. And you will need to be able to have access to the same Python that comes with ArcGIS Pro. So if you have ArcGIS Pro, you'll be able to, you'll have the Python that you need to be able to run these tools. So, so don't worry about that. And then just lastly, Windows Task Scheduler. So you've already have this on your computer if you're a Windows user, and that's going to be the tool that we use to automate these tools in the Record Import Toolbox. What does this tool cost? Well, it's totally free at solutions.esri.com or solutions.arcgis.com. I'm sorry, I got a mistake in there. And it's actually part of two other solutions. So we'll talk about that in a little while. You can get this tool in the documentation for either the crime analysis toolbar for ArcGIS Pro or the daily activity dashboard. So both of these are solutions that are on our solutions website at solutions.arcgis.com. And the record import tool is available as kind of part of the documentation around both of those tools. So let's hop into how these tools actually work, and then we'll just jump right into a real demonstration of how to get them configured. So at a high level, how the record import toolbox works is first, it's going to require those nightly data extracts as spreadsheets or CSVs. So you got to have those. And then the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to use one of the tools in the toolbox called the Import Records tool. And there's two versions of this tool. There's one for if you're working with address data, and there's one if you're working for X and Y data. So the result is the same. It's just a matter of whether you're geocoding against addresses or you're rendering XYs, depending upon what data you already have in your data extract. So this tool is basically helping you to create a configuration file. And that configuration file is keeping track of all the parameters that are going to populate this process. Where is your spreadsheets located? Where is your address locator located? Which fields in your spreadsheet have the address or the XY information in them? If we're mapping this data to an existing layer, let's map the field names in the spreadsheet to the field names in the layer in the event that they are not identical. So we're setting up a bunch of stuff that otherwise you manually have to go to, and the result of this tool is to create a configuration file. So you'll give it a name, and its suffix will be .ini, and that is this configuration file that has all the parameters that you need to run this process. And from there, we use a second tool that is going to be called the Import Records tool. The Import Records tool, we are going to set up to run in Windows Task Scheduler as a Python script, and we'll set it up to run on a nightly basis, and it's going to just perform the process of geocoding and then publishing the results to either a local feature class or an ArcGIS Online hosted feature service, whichever you define in your configuration file. And you'll be able to schedule this to run on a rate recurring basis, and it'll just work. So it saves you ultimately a ton of time. You never have to touch any of this, but it does require that you're getting these nightly spreadsheets dumped out of your records management system or your CAD system, and that you have the ability to use Windows Task Scheduler to automate the running of these this import records script tool that comes out of ArcGIS Pro. So I know all that may sound slightly scary or slightly complicated to you, but it is extremely well documented on our solutions site, and I'll show you that in just a bit. And we're going to walk through step by step how you do it right now. So the very first place that I want to start is at our solutions site. As I mentioned before, these tools can be found at solutions.arcgis.com. And as you scroll down the solutions site, the first section of the site that you'll see is called the ArcGIS Solution for Local Government section, and you'll see a featured content carousel that shows land records, water utilities, public works, and then you'll see a right button. When we press that right button, we'll see the law enforcement section come up, and if we click this, we'll see all of the solutions that are available to us in the law enforcement solutions section. The very first two, one section category is called Organize Foundational Data. Another is called Perform Crime Analysis. If you click on the Learn More link under Perform Crime Analysis, this is where you'll find information about the crime analysis toolbar for ArcGIS Pro. But in this particular example that we're going to walk through, I'm going to configure the import records toolbox to automate and publish to another solution that's called our daily activity dashboard solution. You'll find this under the Organize Foundational Data section. So if I click the link, Learn More button here, I can see I've got a couple of different options in here. If I click the Monitor Public Safety Incidents, press View Application, I'm going to see an example of the daily activity dashboard and what it can do for me. So when I just click that, it's going to open this up for me in just a minute. While that loads, I'm going to go back to this page and I'm going to click on the Learn More button under Monitor Public Safety Incidents. This is where I'll find the help documentation for not only getting started with the dashboard, but also the import records toolbar itself. So if I'm going to go back to my daily activity dashboard as an example, and just get this finish getting this loaded. So this particular dashboard, once it's finished loading, is really meant to be a first start for you to be able to deliver to your users in your law enforcement organization a kind of quick tool for reviewing recent crime and call activity. Internet seems to be going a little bit slow here, apologize. So it's got a kind of a bunch of different tabs. It's separate tabs for a number of different data types. So calls for service data, where I can see some charts that break down my calls for service by day of week, hour of day, by call type. I can see a list of calls and zoom to a particular call and see the information about that call. I've also got the same thing for crimes and for arrests. My first tab gives me the kind of active totals for all of this data. And I have the ability to apply a number of different filters. So if I wanted to look at the last 7 days of activity, for example, or I wanted to focus and filter by a particular officer or a particular day of week or by activity type. The most important thing to know about this dashboard is that it is completely configurable. So you can deploy this from Esri and get started with it and then tweak it to fit your needs. So this is what I'm going to be using my import record solution for. I want to be able to take this dashboard, make it my own, and then publish data into it on a nightly basis so that this dashboard remains fresh. Does that make sense? Okay, so first things first, how do I get this dashboard in my own ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise organization before I even worry about pushing data into it? Well, to get this dashboard, if we go back to the documentation on this dashboard, and we go to the Get Started tab, the very first thing that it's going to ask me to do is go to install a new add-in for ArcGIS Pro called the Solutions Deployment Tool. When I deploy that, I download it and I run it, I'm going to get the resulting new tool in ArcGIS Pro. This is ArcGIS Pro if you haven't seen it before. The Solutions Deployment Tool is going to be on my Share ribbon in ArcGIS Pro, and it'll be the last tool here. And what I can do with this tool is click it to open it. And I've got a number of different tasks in here. I'm already signed into my ArcGIS Online organization, so I don't have to do the first step. The second step is to deploy an ArcGIS solution. So I can click this. And as I click this, my toolbar went away. Hold on just a second. So when I open my pane back up, it's going to load for me a library of all of the different solutions that are available. And to find the daily activity dashboard, I can simply click under local government and open up all of the solutions that are available to me, or I could just search for it in the search bar. I will scroll down here. and select Daily Activity Dashboard and deploy it. Now, what happens when I do this is it will deploy all of the layers, web maps, and the app itself that is necessary to create this daily activity dashboard configuration. It's all empty, but all of this configuration and the layer schema is all there. So if I go back to my ArcGIS Online organization, and I should mention that that tool works not only in ArcGIS Online, but also in ArcGIS Enterprise. So if you need to be able to deploy these kinds of solutions into your organization, you can do that if you're using ArcGIS Enterprise as well. So this is my ArcGIS Online organization, and I've recently deployed that daily activity dashboard. And I deployed it into a folder in my content section. So I'm going to click on the content button. And I called that section. I called that folder December webinar. So if I go into my content section, and I can see all of the different folders that are in my content section. I scroll down to December 2018 webinar. I can see it has deployed a whole list of different layers, foundational layers I need, views of those layers specifically for the dashboard, the maps that are necessary for the dashboard, and the actual dashboard itself. I've already gone ahead and configured this dashboard to fit the way that I want it for this particular example. So this is my dashboard. And for this example in the webinar, I'm using data from Rochester, New York. And I've only built a crimes dashboard. You can see I don't have any other tabs at the bottom. I'm not using calls for service data. But I've already populated this with some baseline data. And I've got data in here through September 30th, 2018. I've got a 90-day filter on by default, and I've got 658 crimes during that time frame. So that's some work that I've already done before we started the webinar. And so now what we want to be able to do is, okay, I've gone ahead and I've downloaded this daily activity dashboard. I've subsequently manually geocoded on my own some data year to date through September. You can see it here in ArcGIS Pro. I've used the solution deployment tools to, after I deployed my solution, after I've deployed this daily activity dashboard solution, to be able to then go back. I'm going to interrupt this current task. And I use the task in the solutions deployment tool to load data from this local data set that I had already created. And I publish that data using the load data tool into the layer, the crimes layer that powers my daily activity dashboard. So I'm all set. And now I'm ready to be able to configure my daily extract of crime data so that I can publish this stuff every single night. So where do I start? Well, the first place that I start to do that is I'm going to go to my daily activity dashboard documentation. And in the Get Started tab, under the additional help section, you'll see the first entry. It says configure records import. And in the documentation on the configure records import, the very first step is download and extract the record import toolbox. So when I click this, it's going to prompt me to log into my Esri account. If you don't have an Esri account, this is what enables you to be able to access some of these kinds of solutions. You need to be able to log in using your username and password, see your GIS coordinator. If you don't have this, once you log in, it's going to prompt you to download the toolbox. So I can see it here. I can download this. Here it is. And then I can unzip it. And when I unzip it, I'll have in that toolbox an ArcGIS Pro toolbox that I can bring into ArcGIS Pro and the underlying Python scripts that power those actual script tools. So let's take a look at that. So here I am in ArcGIS Pro, and I'm going to go to my catalog pane, and to bring that toolbar in, that new toolbox in, I would right-click on my toolboxes category, and I would add a toolbox, and it'll prompt me to pull that in. I've already brought that in, and I can now open that record import toolbox, and I can see that I have 3 tools in the toolbox. I have 2 that are called configure record import, one that's for addresses and one that's for being updated every single night, this spreadsheet called daily extract. So now every single day I want to automatically take whatever data is in this daily extract spreadsheet, and I want to geocode it. As you can see, it's got address information, and it only has a local address. It doesn't have XY data already, and it doesn't have, you know, different cities. It's just one single street address for one single jurisdiction. And I want to be able to publish it into the crimes layer that is powering my daily activity dashboard. So let me close that out, and let's start to look at how we can use the ArcGIS Pro records import tools to do that. So the very first step that we're going to want to do is we're going to go to our catalog pane and go back to the records import toolbox. I'm going to double click on the configure record import addresses script tool. And when I do that, it's going to open up the parameters for that script tool. And we're going to walk through configuring this information. So the very first thing that I'm going to need to create is a name for this configuration file that will be automated. And I'm going to call this daily crimes or daily crime data. The next thing it's going to want to know is, okay, where is that nightly extract occur? Where does that live? So I can use my browser tool to navigate to the location on my desktop where that table exists. In this case, I have it just on my desktop in a folder called Automate Geocoding, and it's called dailyextract.xls. So now I can select that, open it up, and there is the actual spreadsheet in that Excel file, rpd_ytd. So I'm going to press OK, add that in. The next thing it needs to know is, all right, so you want to geocode this and then you want to publish it. What's the local feature class or the hosted feature class that you want to publish this to? Okay, so in order to do that, well, I'm going to need to go find the hosted feature service that I want to publish this to. So I'm actually going to go back into catalog, and I'm going to look at the services that were created when my daily activity dashboard that exists in my ArcGIS Pro project. But I can also see any of the layers that I have access to in my portal. So I can click the portal button, and now I can see all of my content that I own. And if you'll recall, I put all of the layers, maps, and apps for the daily activity dashboard into a folder in my content called December 2018 webinar. So if I can open that up, I can see all my different layers. And what I can see here is that the daily activity dashboard comes with a pre-configured, ready-to-use layer called crimes that's already connected to the dashboard. So you don't have to start from scratch. There's already a layer in here that's empty and ready to go called crimes. You just need to map your data to this layer. And if there's additional fields that you need in your data that don't already exist in this crimes layer, you can add those in as well. So this is just kind of a starting point. So I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to add it to my current map. So now I can see it in my map. And simply, since I've previously published all of my year-to-date data prior to October to this layer, you can see that I already have it all in here. It's already a hosted feature service ready to go. It's powering a dashboard already. And now if I go back to my geoprocessing pane, I can click the drop down here and say, okay, my target features for this particular configuration file is this crimes hosted feature service. The next parameter in this tool is going to be, all right, well, what's the name of your portal? So I'm using ArcGIS Online, so I can use www.arcgis.com. If you're using ArcGIS Enterprise, you would put in here the specific URL for the homepage of your portal. I then need to provide credentials, a username and password to be able to validate it against for the purposes of publishing this data up into your organizational portal. The next step is to define where I want log files to go. So the log files that this tool, when it's run, creates include a record of all of the ungeocoded incidents, and if there was a reason why certain incidents couldn't be published, it provides a log of that information too. So it helps you triage when you do have problems, what those problems are. So I'm just going to define that my automate geocoding folder on my desktop is going to be where my log files will go. I now have a couple of fields to fill out. The first one is optional. If I had any particular value in my data set that I wanted to summarize, I could populate this. I don't. I just have records. I'm not interested in summarizing any of my fields in my records. Now the tool needs to know what is my unique ID field, my record identifier field. And in my data, it's the offense number. So it's generally going to be the crime report number, or the offense number of your data. Whatever data is unique, whatever field is unique for each record in the data set. Secondly, it wants to know what the record date field is. So I have a report date field. That's what I'm going to use as my record date field. And then I also have a value in a checkbox here that says delete duplicates, and I've got that checked on. This is a very neat function that is going to check all of your new data. And if the offense number doesn't previously exist in your output file, your existing file, it's going to add that entire record in. If your new data, your new records have different data or a different record date, then it will update your existing data with the new field information. So it's appending where, in the cases where you don't have an existing record, and if you already did have a record, it's updating that information for you. So that's a nice feature here. Now I also have all of the address fields that I might want to be able to use to geocode against that are in my spreadsheet. In this case, as we saw, it's just one single address field. So I'm going to hit the drop down under the street address field and select address. My address locator that I'll be using is a city-specific address locator for Rochester, New York. So I don't need, and I don't even have, a city or a state or a zip code field in my data. I now need to point the configuration file to my address locator that I'm going to use. So I can, I've already added, if I go to my catalog pane, I have in my catalog pane, if I go back to my project, a address locator I've already added to my map called the Rochester Composite Address Locator. If I wanted to, and I wanted to consume credits, I could also use the ArcGIS World Geocoding service as well. But generally, to save yourself credits consumption, you're going to want to use your own local address locator. So I'll go back to my geoprocessing pane, and I will add in my local address locator. And now I've got a little work to do with respect to mapping the data from my spreadsheet to the data in my layer. Because I'm using the Esri default crimes layer that came with the daily activity dashboard, the field names in that layer are different than the field names in my spreadsheet. So I got to use this next parameter, schema mapping type, and I'm going to select the use field mapping option. And that's going to open up another little window here for me to be able to map each of the fields in my spreadsheet to an associated target field in the crimes layer. So just starting off with offense number, It's going to show me, okay, these are the field names in my crimes layer. I'm going to match offense number to the field called offense ID. I'm going to match address to the field called full ADDR. I'm going to match my status field in my spreadsheet to the field called case status in the layer. Hopefully you're getting the idea of how this works. For my report date field in my spreadsheet, I'm going to map that to the report date field in my spreadsheet. And since I can't remember which the dashboard operates off of, I'm also going to map that report date field in my spreadsheet to my offense date field. I'm going fast, but hopefully you're picking up the kind of general concept here. I'm going to map my crime type field to my UCR description field. I've got a location type field in my spreadsheet. I'll map that to the location description field in my crimes layer. And what else do we do? We'll do map weapon type in my spreadsheet to, there's a weapon description field in my layer. And then just a couple more. We're going to do hour of day to hour of day, and weekday in my spreadsheet to day of week in my layer. So now I've mapped the fields in my spreadsheet to the fields in my target layer. I could optionally define a timestamp format if my data was in the form of text. I don't need to do that in this particular instance. But now I'm ready to generate a configuration file that will run all of these parameters for me when I execute the import records tool. So I'm going to run this, and it's just going to take a minute to build this file for me. And once we've got that done, we can just go to the location where I saved this file to validate that we actually have a correct file. And as I mentioned before, the output of this particular file is called a INI file. Let me just make that just went away. My pane went away from me. Let me just pop that out again. So as you can see, it's walking through, it validated, it built my configuration script, and it saved it to my Automate Geocoding folder. So now if I hop back to my folder, I can see that I have a new configuration file in there called dailycrimedata.ini. So that's the configuration file that I just created. If I go back from my geoprocessing pane and I go back to my, go to my catalog pane and I go back to my toolbox, I can see that the next script tool I have is called Import Records. If I click on that Import Records tool, it's going to open up that script tool. And if I wanted to manually run that entire process where it's geocoding all of that data according to the parameters we just set out in the configuration file, and then publishing it to my crimes layer, I could just point this import records script tool to the configuration file and press run, and it would do it. So that's the option that's available for you if you want to use this manually. You can use this script tool to do that. You'll also note that if you're using the crime analysis tool, that import records tool is in the crime analysis tool as well under the data management category. So it's there and available for you. However, we don't want to have to manually run this. We want to be able to automate this using Windows Task Scheduler. And for that, we wouldn't use a script tool in ArcGIS Pro from a toolbox. We're going to have to run it using an actual Python script behind it. And that's in fact what all of these tools actually are. They're actually just Python scripts, but we're surfacing them as tools in ArcGIS Pro. And when you go to the record import tools toolbox itself, you get the Python scripts that power the toolbox. So here you can see the config record import address, config record import XY, and the import records.py tool. So now the next step that we have to do is we just have to tweak the import record script just a little bit since we're using a local address locator. If you're using the ArcGIS Online World Geocoding service, you do not have to do this step. It'll just work in Windows Task Scheduler. But since we're using a local address locator, we need to modify this script a little bit. And if you'll notice, I've created a new script here called importcrimes.mygeocoder.py. So I want to open up both of these, and we're going to look at the differences to help you understand the small change you have to make to the script. So the best way to do this is to just simply right-click on the import record script, make a copy of it, and that's what I did to create this mygeocoder.py script. And then when you want to open the Python script, right-click on it again, and then select the Edit with IDLE ArcGIS Pro option. So that's going to open the default import record script that you get. And I also have a import crimes mygeocoder.py script. I'm also going to open that one up. And we're just going to look at the differences between these two scripts. Okay. So on my left-hand side is the default script. And if you'll notice, the thing that we need to change is actually kind of halfway down the script to where when we start to see these with these red hashtags, it says locator input fields. So the subsequent piece of script right here is defining the valid values for input that are required by the address locator. So the ArcGIS World Geocoding service by default requires all of these different, can accept, I should say, all of these different valid values. And we are defining kind of the specific which these are associated with for the rest of the script. So when we're modifying this script to work with our local address locator, and if your eyes are rolling into your back of your head at this point because you're going, this seems way too complicated, the documentation on the solutions website walks you exactly through what you have to do. The script on the right-hand side is my edited version of this script. So if I go back to ArcGIS Online and I go back to my catalog pane and I right-click on my Rochester Composite Address Locator, I can see the locator properties. And to make a change to the script, what I need to know is what the input fields for this script are. And when I click on the input fields option, I can see that the only field in the address locator that's for input into the locator is called street. So I don't have multiple different options. I only have one single input field option. So what I need to do is change this script that has all these different options to one where my only valid option is a field called street, is an input called street, and that powers the address field. And I'm not going to geocode against a city, state, or zip field. So that's what I've done to make this change. And then I'm just going to go up to File and then Save. And now I'm going to use this resulting Python script to power the rest of my work. So now I've got my configuration file and I've tweaked my import record script. Now what I'm going to do is go to Windows Task Scheduler. So I'm just going to go up to Windows Search and I'm going to search for scheduled tasks. And I'm going to open up Windows Task Scheduler. And this is what the interface for Windows Task Scheduler looks like if you haven't been into it before. And now I'm going to set up a scheduled task that's going to run that will trigger Python on my computer to run the import crimes mygeocoder Python script that I've just created. And it's going to run it using the daily crimes extract configuration file that I just created using the configure records tool. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Action, and I'm going to create task. And I'm going to call this run daily crimes. And then I'm going to go to the actions tab in the create task window. And I'm going to press new. And then I need to specify what action this task will perform. And the action is going to be to start a program. And so in the program/script parameter here, I need to browse to the location where the Python implementation for ArcGIS Pro lives on my computer. And I've just as a cheat sheet, I kind of built this Word document, and this is also in all of the documentation. But it's in program C drive and program files in ArcGIS, and you'll find the Python executable there. This is what needs to go into this very first parameter. So I'm just going to paste that information in there. The second parameter, where it says add arguments, what you're putting in here is first the name of the Python script that you want to run in this task, and then secondly, the configuration file that has parameter information that goes into that script. And so the way that looks is the script name itself has no quotes. So it's import crimes _ my geocoder, and you can just see it right here. And then you want to add in the path where your actual daily crimes extract lives. And I got to tweak that a little bit because we built a brand new one. So what was that one called? That one was called, it was on my desktop. It was in my automate geocoding folder, and it was called daily crime data. So I just need to make sure that I've changed this to say daily crime data.ini. And then lastly, the last parameter here is telling the task where to go to find that configuration file. So it's in my record import tools LG folder in my automate geocoding folder. So it's wherever you put the configuration file, that's where this that's the parameter that you need to fill in here. So once this is okay and ready to go, now I can control a couple of things. I can set when I want this to run, and it is 12:49 on the East Coast. So we'll set it in just a minute to run in just a minute so you can see it update live. But the other thing that I want to note too is if you go back to the general tab for the scheduled task, you need to, if you're going to run this overnight, you need to know the kind of security settings that are on your computer. Does your computer automatically lock you out or log you off if you're unattending your computer for periods of time? You want to make sure that if that's the case, you toggle run when user is logged on or not. And that's going to prompt you to store your username and password so that the computer can access it so that it can have permissions to run that particular task. If you're running into issues making the Windows Task Scheduler task run properly, this is where you may need to engage your network security folks in your IT department to ensure that whatever username you're using to run the task in Windows Scheduler, you have the ability to have the appropriate permissions for your username. Okay, so it's now 12:50. Let's create a trigger for this. So I'm going to go to the triggers tab. I'm going to press new. And this is going to prompt me to be able to, in just a minute, to set up the time and date that I want this to run. So it's 12:51. I will have this run at 12:52 one time. And I'll press OK. I'm going to validate that I have permissions on my computer. And now it's just going to refresh the task scheduler library of tasks that are available on my computer, and we can review this task to take a look at it. So here are all of the tasks that are currently active on my computer. I can see my run daily crimes task, and it is scheduled to run at 12:52 p.m. It's currently 12:52, just turned 12:52 right now. So it's going to get running in just a second. And once it gets running, then we'll be able to see whether it actually works or not. And to keep us from just having to wait, I'm just going to press run to get it going. So now it's going to start running the task. You can see it going. And it'll take a minute to run through this. It's important to know that when you're setting this up, that if you are planning to geocode thousands of records, you are going to need to plan to see how much time it takes these things, because it may take you 30 minutes, it may take you an hour to go through the entire process. So just planning for when you're actually going to schedule this overnight so that it has enough time to run by the time you are ready to roll. So I'm going to let this run for a minute, and I'm going to hop back into the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll revisit the results in just a minute. So how do you get started with some of these capabilities? Well, first things first, what you need. You're going to need to know, okay, where is that spreadsheet that you want to geocode live? What address locator do you want to use? And what is the layer that you want to publish to? Is it going to be a local feature class in a geodatabase, or is it going to be a service? You're going to need to understand how your spreadsheet relates to the fields in that layer so that you can do the field mappings. You're going to need to go get the solutions deployment tool. You don't have to get it, but it's a good idea to get it. So if you wanted to use things like the daily activity dashboard that I showed you, you could. And you're also load that data in advance. From there, once you've kind of got the basics set up, you can download the tool set, just like I showed you. Then you'd go create that configuration file. You would modify that import records script, and you then would set up the scheduled task where you need to point it to the location of your Python install, the location of your configuration file, and the import record script itself. And be sure to be patient for the amount of time that it will take to geocode and publish all of that data. As I was preparing for this webinar, I was on about 51 minutes for just over 5,500 records. So use that as a benchmark. I'm going to bring back our example to take a look to see if it worked. But there's a couple things to know about troubleshooting Windows Task Scheduler. The first thing to know is if the task runs correctly, in the last run result column of Windows Task Scheduler, you'll get a 0x0 result, and it'll say the operation completed successfully. That's good. That means things worked. If you've got 0x1, that means that it didn't work properly. There's a couple of common things that you might run into. Number one is that the script was not able to acquire a schema lock, and that generally happens when things like someone else or you has the spreadsheet opened so that the Python script can't get a dedicated lock on the spreadsheet. In some cases, it might have been a lot of data. There might have been a network connectivity issue that messed up the publishing into ArcGIS Online or your ArcGIS Enterprise portal. In both cases, just make sure that you're opening and closing the spreadsheet that you're using this off of, and then rerun them manually. And then you may also be running into issues around administrative rights to run tasks, and that's where you need to get your IT department involved. Let's take a quick look at our Windows Task Scheduler to see if it finished. It is still running for me, so I'm gonna just give it another minute, and we'll kind of continue on a couple of the other considerations for this. So I saw a question pop up, and the questions, it's kind of hard for me to see the questions at the same time as the PowerPoint presentation, but how do you handle manual re-geocoding? Well, as I mentioned, you get these logs. So if we go back into the folder that I'm storing the logs in, I can see it created a folder, a file called unmatched, and I can take this information and I can open up this log, and it's going to give me kind of what you can see below in this PowerPoint, records of all of the unmatched addresses. So what you're going to want to do is manually re-geocode that spreadsheet. There are spaces between the records, so you're going to have to remove the spaces, but manually re-geocode those, and the result of that is going to be a local feature class. You can then use the append tool in ArcGIS Pro. The append tool is basically the same as that load data tool that you saw me show in the solutions deployment tool. But if you don't want to use that one, you can just go into the geoprocessing window and you can search for the append tool and append that data into your existing service. And you just want to kind of double check that data to ensure that you haven't had record duplication. You shouldn't generally have that problem. But when push comes to shove, if you re-geocoding data over and over every single night, you really do need to fix that address data at the source in order to avoid the recurring set of re-geocodes. So let me just I know we're kind of running short on time, and there's a lot of questions about this particular tool set. Where do you find this tool set? Well, you find this, oops, let me move that. You find this at solutions.arcgis.com. As I mentioned, you'll find it in the local government section under law enforcement. It'll be under the organize foundational data, monitor public safety incidents / daily activity dashboard. And that's where you'll find all of the help documentation. You will also, if you already have downloaded the crime analysis toolbar solution, you actually already have the record import toolbox. It's just in like a very funky place, way down in the bowels of your directories. If you go to the help documentation on the crime analysis toolbar, you can, it'll show you this right here, which is basically the path where that toolbar exists. But the easiest place to find it is in the solutions.arcgis.com under the monitor public safety incident solution / daily activity dashboard solution. You go in there, go into the get started tab, and you'll find it right there. So I know I've thrown a lot at you today during this webinar, but as far as kind of the training goes for this, we do actually have a training on this as part of the web trainings that are available. They do require you to be on maintenance, but that are part of the crime analysis solution data management training seminar. So to find this, if you go to training.esri.com, search for crime analysis solution :data management, data management, and you'll find a self-directed, hands-on training for going through this process of automating tools using the import records solution. So I'm just looking at my Windows task scheduler, and unfortunately it's still running, so I won't be able to show you the end output, but the idea would be that once that finishes geocoding and publishing, your daily activity dashboard will go from September 30th to October 1st. You'll have that new data in, and anything else that is using that crimes layer in your organizational portal will now be updated. So think about it not just in terms of this dashboard, but if you use that crimes layer to power a story map or any other web mapping applications or a mobile app, all of that data will now be updated without you having to manually republish it. Okay, so I know I'm running a little long. I apologize. There was a ton of questions, so I wanted to to give a chance to walk through a couple of those questions. The first question was from was back at 1210. Was that ArcGIS Pro 2.0 or greater, or was it Desktop 2.0? This particular toolbox does require ArcGIS Pro 2.0 or later. Another question was, for posting this data in ArcGIS Online, how far along is Esri from being CGIS certified? The general rule of thumb with respect to the use of PII data in ArcGIS Online versus ArcGIS Enterprise is if you have data that has personally identifiable information, you're going to want to store that in ArcGIS Enterprise or on your own on-premise server, not in ArcGIS Online. That being said, ArcGIS Online does have encryption in transit and encryption at rest as part of its baseline capabilities. Lots of people asking about, will this webinar be available for you after the fact? I know we went through a lot and it was kind of hard to keep track or keep notes of everything. Yes, this webinar will be on our webinar site, esri.com/pswebinar. That's where you can find information about upcoming webinars, as well as all of our historical videos of every webinar that we've done. So that's where you'll be able to see this. That'll be out in a few days. A couple of other questions include, what can you do if there's not currently a way to get the data out of the system the police are using in CSV or spreadsheet form? So if there's not a good, clean way to get that data out in CSV or spreadsheet form, you're probably looking at having to engage some DBAs on some other integration opportunities. One potential consideration, if you have the bandwidth and the GIS expertise for it, is the use of Geo Event Server to be able to pull the database tables directly. Another question was, is it possible to utilize a table in file geodatabase instead of a CSV spreadsheet using this method? If so, does the process change? You know, I don't know off the top of my head if it supports the use of file geodatabases, but I will find that answer and I will get back to you, Megan Armstrong. Thank you for that. That's a great question. Michelle Jennings asks, can I use lat long instead of addresses? Yes. The second tool in the toolbox, which is configure records imports XY, configure record import XY, supports the use of rendering data that already has XYs instead of rendering address. So I just showed you using the configure record import addresses tool. If you already have XYs, you can use the configure record import XY tool to render those addresses instead. Just scrolling down, there's been a lot of questions coming in. Another question was, is it easy to reconfigure these tools to append data each day rather than replace it? From Spencer Morgan. Actually, this tool does by default append data. If you didn't want to replace data or you had duplicates, just uncheck that delete duplicates checkbox, and it's going to take care of that for you. Just lastly, question on the ops dashboard side at the bottom of the map event. How are these added? Well, those are added from by using the record import tools for the live data on a daily basis. But to start off, you can use a tool. You can either publish that data from ArcGIS Pro directly, or you can use the append tool in ArcGIS Pro to be able to add that information in. So there's a couple of different opportunities for you as well there. So I know I've run a little bit long. I'm sure there's probably lots of additional questions that many of you have with respect to the use of this tool. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight initially into kind of the potential capabilities that this tool has for you. And if you do have additional questions or you need additional help with respect to getting this particular capability done, I'm glad to help you. Oh, I also notice that my tool using Windows Task Scheduler did just finally update, because now I can see in my dashboard that not only I have new records in from October 1st, 2018, which is my new data. So my tool did successfully geocode and publish my data properly, and I have all of the new day's data. So that's exciting. So if you have questions, you need additional help, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm glad to, if I don't have the answer for you directly, I'm glad to help facilitate that information for you. My email address is cdelaney@esri.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Delaney, @cDelaneyGIS. Thanks very much for your time today. I hope it was useful for you, and we hope to see you at the next Esri Law Enforcement webinar. Thanks again. Have a great day. Have a great rest of your December holiday season.